Center for Educational Media and the College of Education at Middle Tennessee State University are proud to offer professional development to K-12 educators in Tennessee through our online video library. These videos are aligned with standards set by the Tennessee Department of Education. For more professional development videos, check out our website at www.mtsu.edu/CEM.
Our first session today is Department of Education. So come on up, Joanne and Dr. Gribble. District and school leaders supporting the success of English learners. I look forward to this presentation, and this is your opportunity for Q&A. Please hold most of your questions to the end of the session, and we will address them then. So, Joanne Runyon, Dr. Gribble, thank you for being here.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's so nice to be here today on a Friday, seeing some very familiar faces. I saw some of y'all yesterday, so it's nice to see you this morning as well. For the folks that I have not met that are in the room, my name is Joanne Runyon. I am the Senior Director of Intervention Programming, and I also support the instructional programming for English learners. I think this year I'm celebrating my 10th year at the department. And so we've been through many journeys together. Some folks in the room here, you've been through this journey with me from the get-go, from back when I started in 2013 to now us being in 2023. Yeah, it's been a bit. So this morning we're excited to be here with you. We have some resources to share, some updates to share, and then we will also have some time to field questions. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Hannah.
Good morning. I'm Hannah Gribble. I am the Title III and Migrant Education Program Grant Manager in the Federal Programs and Oversight Division. Essentially, I look at your CFAs, do your monitoring. That's me. I'm one of those people.
Okay, to go ahead and get us started, as we visit our strategic plan, a lot of what we're going to talk about really focuses on the three areas that you see on the screen. What we have as far as updates, what Tennessee has in place in rule. As we talk about instructional practices to support our schools, we are not only discussing academics, student readiness, and educator support. It all works together as we walk through our presentation today. A lot of focus on processes and procedures to best support students, to see the outcomes that we need, to see that student readiness that we want students to have as they go forth and access post-secondary outcomes and so forth. So as you look at the strategic plan, I think the jobs that you all do day in and day out hit every area here, if not more. So for our agenda today, we will be discussing ESL rule, some changes for FY24 requirements. We're going to discuss individual learning plans. You all know that over the summer, we actually kicked off May 31st and ended our last session, which was virtual, on June 23rd, around preview sessions that were focused around the three different subgroups of students for unique learning needs. And so those were very well attended. Last night, we were looking at attendance with virtual and in person, and we covered maybe about, when I looked at the attendance, it was about 1,172 folks that attended these sessions across the state, and then heavy attendance for virtual. And so a lot of opportunity there. We will also discuss the different unique learning needs as it applies to our funding through TASL. So we'll have a short conversation about that. And then we'll look at some supporting EL instruction resources. There are two main resources that we'll talk about today. The IPGs for supporting our students that are English learners and our students that may have a disability. So you all know that a lot of our teachers have engaged with literacy training. And so if they engage with literacy training in 2022 or are currently doing that, they have access to these guides to help them make those connections with knowledge for students in the classroom when they are working through their literacy practices and they're using their high quality instructional materials. We will also talk about a different guide, which I was very blessed to help with supporting this guide. So I know that there may be different programs or different processes that you follow in your district when you start talking about coaching and how we do teacher observations. And so the one that I'm going to share today really has a lot of information of those high quality look-fors as we are engaging in classrooms that have English learners. So not just our ESL classrooms, but our classrooms that are serving that core instruction for English learners. And then we will also discuss other resources available. So before we start into the main part of the presentation, we'd like to start by asking you all, what is working well with your English learners? I know that you're in the summer. I know that some of y'all are still working with your summer school, but what do you feel is working well in your district as you see the population of English learners? Yesterday, we heard a lot of population is growing in many different places. Some places that weren't accustomed or historically have served English learners are now seeing students enroll into the district. And so we want to ask you what is working well, whether this be you exited the number of students you wanted to exit, you tried an instructional approach that worked very well. Maybe you were working very closely with coaching an educator in the core instruction to ensure that they were providing the scaffolding that students need. So what is working really well in your district right now? Or in your classroom, or in the school that you serve? Yes, go for it, Sabrina.
Let's see, I believe, yes, I was wondering about this mic. Okay. I would say the professional development that is in the actual role there. A lot of our teachers and the district has been very supportive. We've built out relationships so that we can get that professional development to the teachers. We are working on trying to get more like smaller collaborative sessions with our teachers to get them, I guess, in touch with some of the changes that are going on. We know like the crosswalk is coming out, so that's something that I'm hoping to slowly get that in with our teachers. We exited, in my opinion, several students. So what we're doing is working, so that's a good thing. Yeah. And it shows too, though, that we're getting that support from our classroom teachers and they are listening. And so I'm trying to show my ESL teachers, that it's not just us, it is everybody on board, and we all have a important role in their education. So.
That's very true. Thank you. Congratulations, Sabrina. That's good. Anyone else that'd like to share? Go, Ms. Ellis, yes.
Well, I think the collaboration, particularly at the elementary level, between ESL and content teachers and the alignment of the curriculum has really strengthened our program at that level.
Good. I know you've done a lot of hard work in that area to make sure that collaboration happens. Anyone else?
I also agree. We're using those high quality instructional materials, and our ELD teachers are using those as well. So that bridge right there has changed everything in our district, I believe.
Good. So there's that common understanding of what needs to take place. That's wonderful.
I have the privilege to work with a lot of different schools in Tennessee, and one commonality that I've seen across them is they're taking a much more intentional investment in their content area teachers and equipping them with tools and strategies and knowledge to support these students in a way that some of them never have before. And that has been something that has impacted students. It's increased the confidence of the teachers, and it's just created better learning environments across the state. And so I think they're going to be so excited about the resources that you're rolling out this year too.
Good, that's really good to hear. We can take one more. Stan? Yes.
We've seen success. We've seen success with the content-based model. in looking at the students who exited services this past year, most of them received their ESL instruction with the content-based model of the ESL teacher alongside the content area teacher in the classrooms. And so those students, those ELs who were level 3s and above, were those who mostly benefited from that model.
Thank you, everyone. What great information for you to share. So what I hear is their collaboration is getting stronger. There's opportunity for our ESL specialists to really work with our content instruction, so ensuring that students are able to access the content in the classroom. I also hear that we have some very strong, promising models that are helping our students exit, and that is wonderful. I remember when we kicked off the collaborative, a lot of the, I guess I should rephrase it, some of the concerns and some of our areas of need were really vamping up. How do we get the importance of how we need to ensure that students have access to instruction in core instruction? And so to see where we are today versus where we were back when we started the collaborative together, it's really a great growth to know that we now have those spaces, we have that opportunity, we see the investment that our educators are making, that they're seeing the value in how this is supporting their students in their classroom. One thing that was very common yesterday when we met together was that the strategies that folks presented yesterday weren't not just, the best strategies for our English learners, but they're also good strategies for our students that might be identified under IDEA, our students that come from some backgrounds that may not have the strongest access to vocabulary for whatever those limited reasons might be. And so those practices just make that knowledge be more accessible for our students. So thank you for sharing that. So I'll turn that over to Hannah.
So briefly, we want to talk about updates to rule. As most of you in this room know, years ago we had ESL policy 3.207. In July 2021, the ESL rule became effective. So since then, we've had a couple of changes to it, most notably in the past year that has changed. The important thing to know about rule is it carries the force of law. And what I mean by that is it is equal to Tennessee Code annotated. And so one of the big shifts from policy to rule is when you have your results-based monitoring, it's no longer a recommendation for improvement, it's a correction needed if you're out of compliance with rule. So it's heavier. A couple of changes. So in the past, ILPs included strategies, accommodations, short-term goals, things like that. This year we've added assessment data, which would include WIDA results. If they're in those tested grades for TCAP, those TCAP results, or end of course exams, things like that. But it could also include any benchmark data, universal screener data, any data pieces you have to inform both your ESL teacher and your content teachers about that student. And I know Emily is going to talk about data this afternoon, so she'll have some good things, I think, to say about that. The other thing about the ILPs, so the K through 3 is a language-focused support system, while the 4 through 12 has those language supports, but also the career and college readiness supports, all aligned with their academics, of course. And then we now require ILPs for transitional year 1 and year 2 students. So if you've been using those monitoring forms that you send out to teachers every quarter, every semester, that will shift, and those will now be ILPs. And that's how your transition students will be monitored. Another big change is in service hours. So the elementary did not change. It's still an hour required unless they meet that threshold for tailored services. For middle school and high school, that has changed to a minimum 45-minute class period. With that said, as a couple of you know from yesterday when I was answering questions, that can't be all of our core classes are an hour and 15 minutes, but our related arts classes are 50 minutes, so ESL can have the 50 minutes. ESL is considered a core class for these kids and needs the same consideration. Okay, requirements. I think everybody in the room is fairly familiar with this. You get a student enrolling, they fill out the home language form if they did not have one already. If they're a transfer student, you need to try to get access to that first home language form. If they mark something other than English on that home language form, then you would use the appropriate WIDA screener. For kindergarten through first semester, first grade, that's the WIDA screener for kindergarten. Second semester of first grade, all the way through 12th grade, that's the WIDA screener. I really encourage you to look at the rule and pay attention to those cut scores because they're different depending on the test. And for that WIDA screener for kindergarten, they're different depending on what parts of the test are given and what semester that student is enrolling. If the student does not meet those cut scores, they are an ESL student and do have to have those required services. The screener cannot be used to tailor services at this time. So anybody who is a newly enrolled student and has that screener score, it's an hour for elementary, minimum of 45-minute class period for middle school and high school. We cannot tailor services based on the screener. Okay, WIDA says it's not to be used for that purpose, so we don't use it for that purpose. With the ESL services, of course, you've got to let those parents know their rights. They can waive services at the beginning of the year. They can waive services in the middle of the year. They can opt to put their child back into services in the middle of the year. And that's a yearly thing. Parents have to be notified every year of that. They have to request to waive every year if they want their student waived. Okay? It's not a one and done. I can't say, oh, my child doesn't need ESL in first grade and never again have that discussion. It's when that child gets to second grade, we're going to have that discussion again. And obviously, it's the parent's choice, the school system, staff. Nobody needs to be trying to convince that parent one way or the other. And then they will have an ILP. Okay? The ILP is to be developed by classroom teachers and ESL teachers. It's not just the ESL teacher. And I think our new system is going to help with that quite a bit because your core content teachers, your classroom teachers are going to have access to that. Training, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. So there are things in rule about training. First of all, your ESL teachers have to be certified. Okay. Also, those teachers giving WIDA access have to be certified and have to have passed the WIDA training courses for those assessments. That goes for the screener and for access. All teachers working with ELs must have training on English language acquisition. We all know teaching for ESLs is good teaching for your other students, like Joanne said, those who come from a background where there's not as much vocabulary, those who might have special needs in some way. Train all your teachers. There's no reason for me to go and train Alice because she's got a first grader who's waived and not train April because A student with a waiver might walk into April's classroom tomorrow, and then you're out of compliance. Just go ahead and train all your teachers. I think I've hit everything there. There are things in rule. One of the things that was added this year to those required trainings is your teachers have to know about the requirements of the ILP. Okay, so there's ESL instructional methods, English language acquisition, strategies for working with ELs, strategies for collaboration so that ILPs are developed with both content and ESL teachers, and the requirements around the ILP. We've already said ESL is part of core instruction for those students. It needs to have the same consideration. And you know your ELs need to be served appropriately and also placed in an appropriate grade level. Scaffolding is required. So it's not in our Tennessee state rule, it's in federal law. And a side note, yesterday, I saw one of my former ESL students here on campus, and the thought that returned to me is nobody would ever know she was ESL, first of all. But when she had been here for 5 months, she started school in April one year, I had her the following fall. Her teacher would not modify or accommodate because she thought it was unfair to the other students. Please do not let that happen in your school buildings, in your districts, okay? It's a violation of OCR. So just a little side note, sorry I'm preaching. But you know, it hurts your heart to think that one of your kiddos is not getting what they need. So parents and guardians have to have information in a manner and language they can understand. So what if that parent doesn't read in their native language? Then they need interpretation, verbal. Please don't use Google Translate, okay? If you choose to use Google Translate to be compliant, that has to be reviewed by somebody who's competent in that language to make sure that it's accurate and conveys the intended message of the original document. Okay, Google Translate, Microsoft Translate, things like that are not always reliable because there are lots of phrases that we use that those computer systems don't translate quite the way that we mean those things. And there's no set time for a student to be referred. We talked about this a little bit yesterday with in regard to RTI. Okay, I would not suggest putting a brand new student with no English proficiency into an RTI classroom. But you also can't wait 3 years, 5 years. There are disabilities that have nothing to do with English language production, right? So sometimes there are disabilities when that student's in the silent period. They might be physical. They might need a 504 for some reason. You know, don't wait. Use your data. Plug in Emily's session again this afternoon. Use your data, kid by kid. Our program models, we talked a little bit yesterday about how push-in has not been included the whole time we've had rule. The reasons for that, as we said, were ESL teachers were going into classrooms to push in. Content teachers had no clue why that teacher was in there. Or it was, here's what we're doing today, modify it for this kid on the spot. There is a way to apply for a model that's not on this list. If you need that, you can email either one of us. We'll send that to you. You will need to justify that model, show why it's effective. If it's more of a push-in based model, you'll need to discuss in that process how you're providing co-planning so that it's truly a co-teaching and not just a glorified aide going in there or an ESL teacher sitting there waiting for the content teacher to ask them to help with something. Exit process has not changed. Students still need a 4.4 composite and a 4.2 literacy on WIDA Access, or a P1 or higher on the ALT Access. When students exit, according to those test scores, they're transitional for 4 years. Those T1s and T2s have ILPs. The T3s and T4s, that's really for accountability purposes. They're put in to that subgroup. Okay, and that's it on that one. And over to Joanne.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you so much. So let's jump into a little bit about ILPs, because we know, as Hannah mentioned, that we have some new areas of focus. So our teachers have been accustomed to having individual learning plans, whether your district already had a platform or whether your district was doing an alternate model, whether it was like Google Office or Microsoft Forms, whatever format you were using. Some of the changes that are taking place are not necessarily changing the whole process of the ILP, but adding in areas of focus. You all know that this year, Governor Lee really stressed his emphasis on career readiness. And so there are funds that are available. We now have like innovative school grants. We have all these grants, right? We love our grants in Tennessee, and that's wonderful because all of these support what students need. At the same time with all that, there's a lot of accountability, a lot of paperwork, a lot of funding applications, all those wonderful things y'all get to see. One of the changes that you will see, or additions I should say, for grades 4 through 12 is career readiness. And so that emphasis on ensuring that we are early on focusing on supporting a student to see themselves ready for that workforce, whether it be that they're going straight into a skill or they're going to go to a college for 2 years or a university for 4 years, whatever that might look like. That emphasis starts early on. I don't think that that's something new for classroom teachers because if I think back when I was in the classroom and I had peers in the classroom, I remember when I was teaching those grades like 4th and 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th, the emphasis was always get them ready for high school. They'll have to choose a pathway. They need to be ready. And so that needs to be our emphasis. The way those conversations happen are different. Obviously, we're not going to have specific conversations about picking courses unless you have a 4th and 5th grader that already has their little, roadmap in mind about what they want to take in high school. We wouldn't have those types of conversations maybe until middle school to prepare our kids for high school. And once they're in high school, we obviously have those deeper conversations about support models so that students know who their counselors are that can help them with support around courses and that sort of thing. So we know those conversations look differently in 4th and 5th grade versus middle school versus high school. But the emphasis there to start early on to help students start identifying what those great soft skills they have are, or to help them find what those traits might be and link those to opportunities that they could potentially see in a job opportunity. That's what this is emphasizing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the categories that we have for English learners as we look at our Tennessee Investment in Student Achievement, or TISA. The first category that you see here is TISA Tier 1. And so I'm very careful when I talk about the tiers under TISA because we don't want to get those confused with RTI tiers. And so for TISA Tier 1, there are 3 groups of students that are under this unique learning need. And this is unique learning need 2. So unique learning need 2 provides a 20% additional weighted funding above the base funding that is provided for students, which is that $6,860 that's provided for students. So this is an additional 20 that's above that foundational. these students, these three groups of students are your indirect service students, so our students that are on waived services. So these are students that are not being pulled out by the ESL teacher. All of their access to instruction is happening in that gen ed setting. And so that 20%, as you think about in your district, you know what the needs are in your district. Is it that your teachers need training? Is it that your teachers need some resources to be able to use or put into effect the strategies that you heard yesterday around scaffolding? Do they need some of those resources to help students get into reading, where they are with their reading levels, and then take away those scaffolds, get them to where they need to be to grade level reading? What are those needs that you see amongst your staff? So that's what that support is there for. When you look at that second group, we're looking at our long-term English learners. So these are our students that have already received 6 years of ESL service, and they're going into their 7th year. So these students are also part of that 20% to help with whatever that may be as part of their need. Is it that we need to have more focused data dives to understand what are those areas of intentionality that we need to focus on to see what is keeping them from exit? Or this might be a student that you have as duly identified that has other needs and is more than likely possibly generating another unique learning need under one of the different option codes if they have a primary or secondary area of need under IDEA. For the third group, we have our transitional English learners. These are our kids that have exited year 1 and year 2. These students also have that 20% additional weighted funding above that base funding. Thinking about the resources that would be needed there, very similar to the two groups we just talked about. What are the areas of need that our educators might have? Do they need training? Do we need support resources that come with our high quality instructional materials? Maybe we haven't looked at those ancillary resources and we need to talk with our provider to see what is available to help the students in these groups. So that is the first tier of TISA. The second tier, this is our unique learning need 4. These students are generating that 60% additional weighted funding. So these are your students that are above that 3.0. So these are your students that are 3.1, right? Because above 3.0, we're 3.1, and are now at 3 years plus of ESL service. So they've already had year 1, year 2, and year 3, and they're going to year 4. So it could be either or. So let's talk about this. I could be a student who has not yet hit a 3.0, a 3.1, 3.2. However, this is my 4th year of ESL service. So then I would be a student in tier 2, that TISA tier 2. Okay. Yes, it's either or, yeah. Yep. Let's look at TISA tier 3. These are students that are 3.0 and below, 3.0 and below, and have not yet had those 3 years of ESL. So if I'm a student and I have a 2.9 and I'm in my 3rd year of ESL, I'm a tier 3 student. As soon as I leave that year 3 of ESL, I jump into tier 2, whether or not I've met that 3.0 threshold. So thinking about that, where they are with their scoring on their WIDA Access Composite, their overall, or the years. So it's those 2 areas that you look at. For TISA tier 3, these are our students that generate the most. They are unique learning need 5. They generate 70% above that weighted funding. At this time, we do not have specific guidance on how you are to spend your additional weights. However, I believe that conversations are taking place with our directors of schools to talk about what that accountability process is going to look like. For those of you that have been in this business for many years, you know that with additional funds comes a lot of accountability. And so think about when we rolled out ESSER, our CARES Act, all of our different supplementary grants. Every grant had an accountability process, whether it was something that needed to face the public, a safety plan, how those funds were being spent, numerous board meetings. I've heard from many of y'all when I was your Middle Tennessee ESSA Oversight Coordinator. You would tell me about your wonderful experiences with explaining how your funds were being used. So in that same sense, though at this time we don't have specific guidance on how the money needs to be spent, think about what those potential accountability pieces could be when it comes to talking about possibly reporting, or if you're in conversations with your board as far as what these monies are going to be used for. I know that superintendents have received reports that provide them like a synopsis of what these potential numbers are. At this point, it might be that they have actual reports that are set in stone, but those are just things to think about as you engage with the number of students that you might have in the different TISA tiers, just to think about what those areas of need might be for you in your district. What I'm hearing so far in the opportunities that we've had for the unique learning needs trainings, a lot of emphasis on making program models stronger. So piggyback on what Stan shared about the model that they use, I know that there is a district in First Tennessee that is very focused on how they serve their students. They're starting small in 2 to 3 schools, and what they're wanting to do is really focus on co-teaching, and they're focusing on getting their content teachers duly certified. So getting them that ESL endorsement. And so they're working on an MOU with the university that's close to them to see if they can start a program, or if they already have a program, how can we get these folks in there to make sure that we're equipping our gen ed teachers with all the strategies, the tools that they might need to support students in the classroom as well. So those are some of the conversations that we're having. A lot of emphasis on collaboration, looking back at schedules to see where we can provide time for folks to plan, prep, that sort of thing. So that's what we've heard across the board. In some areas, it's training, because teachers haven't been accustomed to having English learners in their classroom. So focusing on how do we get those strong training models into the school to work with all of our staff. Some folks are engaging with consulting, really focusing on classroom observations to see what that instruction looks like for English learners. What is happening in the classroom? Like, is scaffolding taking place? Are we really focused on identifying those access points for students? Do our teachers know how to do that? Do they know how to engage with the data to understand where those access points are? I mean, a lot of that takes time, and it does take monetary support coming from a district where we had to bring in a consulting company to help us to identify where we were lacking in our tier 1. It was a lot of work. We did it for 2 years. And as I messaged my former coworker yesterday, like, there is still so much that, the district is working on, and I've been gone for 10 years. So it's a lot of work, a lot of investment, because as our kids come into the school systems, they bring different needs. In some areas, it's not just instructional, but the wraparound supports that students need. And that brings in another need, community resources, help for families, those sorts of things. So that's just a little bit of information there. The next slide that you see reiterates what we talked about, talks a little bit about what Hannah discussed, initial EL determination. The reason why this is on here, because it is very important as we work with our different ILPs, we work with Tennessee Pulse, data verification is going to be key. In order to ensure that our students have the appropriate plan that they need and that they are generating the percentage that they need for their areas of support, we need to make sure that that EL determination is done correctly, and that we followed the appropriate steps to identify students in the system. Also, you see in the last column the type of plan that students will have. You will see K3, 412. The reality is that the K-12 ILP is one ILP. As teachers engage with the different grade levels, if you're engaging with the grade 4 through 12, you will have different fields that are available to you as an educator, because you're working with the grade 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way through 12 student, than what you would see if you're working with a student that is grades K, 1, 2, and 3. The ILP for our transitional students is different. because at this point, we're not looking at that WIDA access data because they are having their needs met in that gen ed setting. So really looking at what data is in the classroom, benchmarks, common formative assessments, universal reading screeners, universal screeners for math, writing, whatever that might be, and then TCAP assessments, if there's any other assessment that districts are working with to gauge where students are. That's the emphasis of that ILP. It's a little shorter than the other ILP. However, keeping in mind that I think that this is where we might need a lot of support because our classroom teachers are really going to have to be invested in this plan. And if that hasn't been a model that's been something that they've engaged with before, this is really going to be new territory for them. So we talked a little bit about the ILPs. Why do we have common ILPs? For those of you that were with me at the Unique Learning Needs session, we talked about where we've been. We've had listening tours. We have monthly Title III office hours. Here in a bit, we're going to start, if it's okay for me to share, Hannah, we're going to start new Title III director office hours. So there will be 2 going on simultaneously for our folks that have been in the business for many years and for our folks that are new to this area of work, or you've worked in this work before, but you're the new leader of all this work. So we will have those new Title III director office hours. In the same fashion, we will have individual learning plan office hours. Those will be weekly. So those will start taking place in August. Teachers, directors, coordinators, whomever is available and has a question will be able to log on and ask, whether it be troubleshooting, whether it be specific questions around ILPs. So that will be weekly time for districts. We will continue with these support hours through December. Then we will revisit and see if we need them weekly or if we need to do them bi-weekly, but you will have that opportunity. We will also have communities of practice to talk about the different areas of need. You heard Hannah talk a lot about training that is required. We want these COPs to be focused on those areas, so there will be opportunities to visit what those trainings could potentially look like. And those resources that are in those communities of practice will be open to districts. So if you need to use those resources for training purposes, whatever area of need might be, all we ask is that you make it your own, that you place it into your district templates, and you add your uniqueness for the needs that you have in your LEA. So we have that plan. I think our first COP kicks off August 11th. I look at Hannah, and I was like, I don't know. August 11th, I believe it kicks off August 11th. There will be a combined one early on for ILPs and ILPDs, just as an intro to set the purpose of the communities of practice. So that is taking place. So we got all this feedback from Title III office hours, visits that took place, not when I was in this role, but Ms. Deborah France and Hannah. They met with districts across the state, listened to what those needs were, and looking at the wonderful notes that Hannah gave me and me engaging in some of those videos, because a lot of these were live streamed. The 3 main areas that I think that I really took away were a uniform platform for individual learning plans, so having a standardized process. The other one was training to make sure that our Tier 1 core instruction folks are able to use scaffolding in the classroom and that they know how to do that based on the levels of English proficiency. And then the third one was the standards crosswalk, which Sarah touched upon yesterday. So, that group met last week. I feel like it was the week before last, but it was only last week. Wow. Yeah, last week. And they put together these crosswalks. The purpose of the crosswalks are to build that bridge between academic standards and our ELD standards, so that our teachers understand that when we have our English learners, we need to make sure that we are using both standards. Both standards are required in Tennessee, and how do we do that? And so those resources are really going to help. I know that one of Sarah's next steps is to work with districts on how to use the crosswalks in schools, in classrooms, and that sort of thing. So those are the 3 areas that I heard as the highest need. One area that did stand out in 2 regions were the need to better streamline family engagement. And so the way all this work took place, obviously one or two people can't do this on their own. There was a unique learning needs working group that was comprised of 9 educators. We actually have educators in the room that were part of the working group. We had a person here from MTSU, Miss Angelica Da Silva, that was really invested in putting this work together. And if it's okay to mention your name, Emily, Miss Emily Bruner was one of our unique learning needs working group members. And I think, did I miss anyone for our ULN group? But I believe I also tapped into Joseph's knowledge there when it came to some of the work that we were doing. So there were quite a few folks, had conversations with Miss Alice, I think with Miss Rachel as well, around some of the things that we were doing with that work. So that's where we are with that. So now let's jump into the instructional piece. And this is where, if you've had access to the resources prior to the session, there were 2 documents that were linked that I mentioned previously that we were going to discuss. So one of them being the Tennessee Aligned Practices Focus on Access for English Learners. So it's the Instructional Practice Guide, the IPG tool.
So it's not in your handouts, but it will be linked in the resources. That's mtsu.edu/CEM.
Oh, good job, Hannah. There. So you will have those 2 resources. So one's the Instructional Practice Guide, and you will know which one it is because it kicks off with the culture of learning, environmental readiness. And so you'll see some boxes. Some areas pertain to students with disabilities. Some areas pertain to English learners. And then you will see the resource that is called Team Observation Considerations for English Learners. And so that one's a little bit more of a lengthier document. That's about 9 pages. But it's not all a document that needs to be completed. It really goes over like considerations for pre-conferencing or when observations take place and that sort of thing. So we're going to look over these as we walk through these slides. So in order for our successful learning environments to be in place for English learners, there are areas that we consider every day, day in, day out. Classroom content, access to instruction, and obviously, as we now have our Tennessee investment in student achievement, having those successful ILPs in place. So for our classroom content, evidence of discourse. Those of us that were here yesterday, as folks talked through their presentations, a lot of what was being shared was to ensure that discourse is taking place in that classroom, that students are talking. That is happening day in and day out. That is how our students build language, having access to an environment that allows them to work with peers, allows them to use their language in the classroom. And by that I mean it can be we're working on their English proficiency. In some cases, you might have the need where some students may need to still use their native language in some type of peer-assisted model with another peer to engage in the classroom until they start building that stronger English proficiency. So classroom content, very focused on discourse. How much talk are we seeing from students when we visit those classrooms? And what does that talk look like? Is it structured? We know that there's a difference between having conversations that students might engage with as far as what they had for dinner versus engaging in a unit where they're talking about the different trails that different groups of folks took into the United States to find land or to discover an area. So there are different conversations that take place. What do those conversations look like? Do students have the tools that they need to engage in those discussions? Whether it be, for example, what Andrew Rainey, Miss Christine Tennyson, and Miss Emily Davis shared, those structured sentence stems, sentence starters, paragraph starters, or paragraph frames. Do students have access to that? And are we pushing them? Are we pushing them to the next level? One example, in a classroom that I observed, the teacher had different leveled questions for her students. And so she had a range of newcomers all the way to kids that were ready to exit. And obviously this took place a long time ago, because now we have fancy apps that can help us, determine what student is going to be asked a question next. And she'd practice this with her class. She said, there will be times I will call on you. This is how this will work. We have these sentence frames on your desk, on the room, wherever they need to be. When I ask you a question, here's a response that you can use to provide your answer. I'm going to challenge you. It's okay for you to use this sentence frame or this structure to verbalize something, but I really want you to move to the next level. And this is what I'm looking for in the next level. So really explaining what that looks like to students. That's what we want to see in the classroom. What does that discourse look like? Is it always the same when we walk in? Or is it that it's different because we're really seeing students being pushed to that next level of language proficiency? In that same area, those Tennessee ELD standards and academic standards application. Is that happening? Do we see evidence that our educators understand how to use the academic standards? And even if they don't have the best knowledge of how to tie in those WIDA ELD standards, they have an understanding of how to teach the language that is required in that academic standard. Are they explaining that terminology to students? You guys saw those handouts that Andrew Rainey had as he walked through the different questions. There was a lot of underlining, a lot of additional words that were written to help a student better understand what terminology meant. Do we see that in our classrooms? Because that's really going to help our students get to where we need them to be.
And if you were not here yesterday, we highly recommend that you go back and watch the recording of yesterday because it was fantastic.
It was very good. Access to instruction. Once again, instructional scaffolding. I know that across the state, we do have some districts that do not require lesson plans. There are, the majority of districts do require lesson plans. Some districts do not. Do we see evidence of scaffolding in those, whatever those plans might be? Whether the teacher names how they're going to be scaffolding, and maybe in their own planning they have something that's more thorough, or as they work with their high quality instructional materials, their materials have access points that are built through the curriculum that tell them what those scaffolds might be, and are they using them when you walk in and you see that instruction? Language acquisition, knowledge, and support. This goes back to what Hannah talked about, training teachers. Do they understand that there are different levels of language proficiency? Have they had the opportunity to look at reports, student reports, to understand what students get to engage with in the spring, the test that they also have, because that is also a very high stakes assessment for our English learners. And what does that look like for our teachers? Do they understand those different components? And then of course, the next one, successful ILPs, collaboration between all teachers, and then the monitoring of progress, how that happens, how we establish that. We know that we monitor progress for students in general throughout the school, whether that be in the middle of the grading period, at the end of the grading period, and what are those expectations when we're working with our English learners. We know we look at what they're doing in the classroom, but do we also look at where they're growing with their English proficiency and whatever that might look like in the district. So these are the three areas to really think about when those observations and those discussions are taking place. Yesterday when Ms. Chris Tennyson spoke, and she referenced a lot of the material from Mr. Hattie in his books around what is successful implementation. A lot of that information really aligns to these areas. You all saw that in that first line where she talked about scaffolds for graphic organizers and discourse. That was like one of the highest results that we could see with our students. So really thinking about what those methods look like in the classroom. These are some teacher trainings that are, well actually not some, these are the teacher trainings that are required in rule. Hannah mentioned them, she's really good, she already has all 5 memorized, but here they are. The Tennessee Language Development Standards, which is our WIDA standards. And we have different models across the state. We've gone from teachers presenting in a room with many folks, to focus teachers going to different schools, to training on the WIDA standards, to using applications, for example, like Canvas Learning, Blackboard. I believe there is another LMS, that learning management system that schools use. Or for example, I'm not too familiar with the one that was shared yesterday, Clever. Clever might have the opportunity to house some of those trainings if you have that in your district. And so ensuring that we have a model and some folks still do them during PLCs or faculty meetings, those short, different trainings. Appropriate ESL instruction methods to use with academic content. This goes back to how we serve students in the classroom. What are we looking at? How do we get to access points? How do we scaffold for that? English language acquisition training for general education teachers to understand the process of acquiring a second language or a subsequent language. And so what training do we provide our gen ed folks to understand what that looks like? We did receive an email that said, how long do these trainings need to be? We do not have a set number of minutes that these trainings need to be. So I apologize if I can't tell you that they have to be 45 minutes to an hour and a half, because you're going to have different models that work for you. You may not be able to do a training all in one sitting, or your training might be some type of module where teachers engage, they apply, they come back, they learn more, they go and apply. Like it will look differently. It just has to be training on how language is developed.
And please document that you've done this, just in case you're one of those schools that we monitor and I have to ask you for your documentation. Yes,
Go ahead.
Dr. Clark has a question, I think.
I'd like to remind everyone who might not have been here yesterday, some of our videos that I will show you later how to access might be training content. And I'm not sure how Tennessee Department of Ed would consider it, but we might have some good training content on our website in videos that are already prepared and ready to view. So I'll show you later how to access that.
Some of those things, there are great resources here from the collaborative. Some of those trainings, you definitely have to do as your LEA. Like the strategies for collaboration, that's an LEA thing. It is going to look different in Rutherford versus Claiborne, on how you have those teachers collaborate. Definitely use those resources, but you do need to make it your own for your LEA.
Yeah. So anything that we present, that Dr. Clark has available, it is up for use. This is why we're here for. We're here to support the training, whatever your needs are. Just make it your own. So I'm not going to take Emily's presentation and present it in my district, and it has Emily will say, on the notes and whatnot. I'm going to tweak it and make it my own. And so whatever you borrow, just make it for the needs of your district. Yeah.
And it's time to give credit.
Yeah.
Like that. Just make sure it's obvious that it's credit and not that you just stole her presentation, because I tend to catch those things.
And then we have the requirements regarding ILP development and implementation. And so this is what Hannah was mentioning earlier. This can be, part of a staff meeting. It can be part of the WIDA standards training meeting that talks about what are those development requirements and implementation requirements. This one also goes hand in hand with the ILP oversight plan that is mentioned in rule. And so I also brought rule with me today, tabbed, to talk about that with y'all. I believe in the resources, rule is also one of the resources that is tabbed. We do have a new rule that posted June 8th of 2023. So when you pull up your rule, at the bottom of the most updated rule, you will see June 2023. And so that one has all the components that were up for review that had the October day marking before we put those changes forth, and we were still operating under March of 2022. So the most updated one will be June 2023.
And just as a side note, we understand that your ILP oversight plan might be a little more fluid this year as everybody is learning a new system, and you're going to have to figure out what works and what doesn't work as far as your oversight plan. So just know that I've already told everybody on our team that it's going to look a little fluid this year, and it's okay if it changes.
And I think, Hannah, you remind me, we are discussing this in office hours, I believe. Yes, we'll be discussing some models If you have one that works really well, we invite you to be a collaborator and share so that we can share that across the state. If not, we plan on reaching out to folks to build some models of what that might look like if folks don't already have one in place. But as Hannah mentioned, there will be some I guess, flexibility in this year because of us, yeah, and yes, thank you, flexibility and understanding because of us launching the statewide platform. Okay. So when we talk about observations, once again, visiting that strong instructional practice that leads to improved student outcomes. Obviously, yesterday you all heard about the different scaffolds, frequent use of gestures, visuals, what is going to get our students engaged in classroom content, ensuring that there is precise modeling, that there are expectations for students. I think that goes a long way, especially with our students that haven't been accustomed to being in a school setting. As a prior, when I was in a K-8 school, I received many students that were coming to me in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade. And some of my students, unfortunately, given their, their different needs and their background, they were not accustomed to being in a school setting. And so ensuring that was one of the first things, setting those expectations for being in school, meeting with the parents, because some parents had not been accustomed to the regulations of a school and understanding that kids needed to be in school. So those sorts of things. The questioning techniques, we talked a little bit about that, so that students are able to respond, but we're also able to push them to that next level of proficiency, that language that we want to hear from them. Developing background knowledge. We heard a lot about that yesterday as we introduced new concepts. What do our kids already know? What can we tap into to make that connection so that they're invested in the units and the texts that we're going to be reading? How is this real for them? Finding that personal connection. And then, of course, that last one goes a lot along the lines with the discourse that we hear, what we allow in the classroom. Sometimes we will get emails here and there that says, should I be allowing a student to speak in their native language in the classroom? I don't want to get in trouble because Tennessee is an English-only state. When we talk about Tennessee being an English-only state, we're really talking about assessment, like our TCAP and our WIDA. That's what we mean by English only. These are needs that are going to happen in the classroom. It is okay to see that in the classroom. Our kids are going to need that. Now, do we always want to keep them there? No. Our goal is, like once again, like what was mentioned yesterday, remove the scaffold and get them to build that independence as they progress in their proficiency. So let's go ahead and look at one of the tools that is in your packet. Let me see if I can do this right, y'all. If I may need to exit. Thank you. You know what the beauty about this is going to be? Me figuring out how to get back to the PowerPoint. It's going to be good times. Okay, so the first tool, and before I get into this, I know that we have different models that we use in the room. So we have some folks that might be using team for observation, or you might be using coach, project coach. Is there a different model that we might possibly have in the room? I feel like when I've met with districts, I hear at least 3. So in this room, we either probably have team or project coach. Okay, perfect, okay. So this tool, and to be honest with you, when Miss Martha Moore reached out to me at the State Department to collaborate, since she was doing at the time a lot of the work around team, we discussed having supplemental tools to have with observations as they take place for different groups of students. And so this tool, I'm not going to read the whole thing because it is 9 pages. What I really want to focus in on are the different areas that this tool focuses on. So this really is shaped around classrooms that have English learners. So this could be your ESL classroom. This can also be your core instructional classroom. So any classroom that has an L that's receiving instruction. So these are just some informative pieces that talk about what this instruction could possibly look like, what those look-fors are. There are some linked documents if this is used for conferencing and whatnot, but for today's purposes, I'm not going to get into this. I just want us to look at what some of these areas of planning are. And so different areas that you see here are like, how do you plan for EL instruction as you address like the individualized needs of students? So what does that look like in the classroom as conversations are happening with teachers? And so they have different areas where you will see different evidence that supports that planning. I hate that I have my back to you all. And then some of the connections that you might see in the classroom, such as standards and objectives, the motivation of students, that safe environment for students to engage with text, to engage in conversation, how that is set up. There are some pre-conferencing considerations for teachers to look at. But where I want to really jump into are the questions that are on this tool. This is a very lengthy tool, but I invite you, when you have some time, if you have time, and you're using this model or you want to supplement a model that you're using, to really think about those considerations that take place in a classroom. So for example, what steps are taken to develop an inclusive classroom environment? How are groups created for lessons? And how do they change? Do we tend to see small groups, but it's always the same kids, and the next year we still see them in the same group, and we don't give it an opportunity to work with other peers? How do we engage students in determining mastery of their own learning? And so how are we removing those scaffolds, those sorts of things? These are great questions that our teachers can visit, and this is public. Our teachers can engage with this if they link to the Tennessee Teams website. They're able to find this under the evaluation tab, and there's supplemental resources that teachers can look at just to get an idea of what are some things that they need to think about. Being in a school where I was very fortunate to work under very strong administrators. My principal was very open on what the expectations were. When I come in and do unannounced visits, or I do announced visits, like this is what I want to see. Anytime that I walk into your classroom, here are some questions for you to consider. These will be revisited formally when we do your observations. But the expectation was very clear from the get-go. They were always reiterated during staff meetings. If we had PLCs, and our assistant principal and our principal floated around to each group to talk about what those expectations were. And so I think sharing these types of questions and ensuring that our teachers understand that this is the expectation that you all are setting as leaders in the classroom, and this is what needs to happen, will really help them understand, okay, in my classroom, I may not be building an inclusive classroom that allows for all my kids to speak. I always see the same group of students speaking. How do I get the group here that I notice, doesn't really say much? How can I get that to happen in my classroom? Because we do want the kids engaging. And so this is just a tool to think about what are some of the actions that are taking place in the classroom. And it does help with planning, understanding what that expectation is for the classroom. So as teachers are lesson planning, lesson prepping, what are the additional considerations that have to take place to make sure that those high quality instructional materials, the questioning, that students are focused on that. So this is one tool that I wanted to share with you all. I know it's linked to the resources. And then let me jump into the IPG. So as mentioned before, teachers that have walked through the literacy trainings, if they engaged in them last year in 2022 or have done this recently, have seen these instructional practice guides. And there's this wraparound for students that have disabilities or students that are English learners. It's chunked around sections. So the first one, the culture of learning, environmental readiness. Are we considering the different areas? This goes hand in hand with ensuring that behavioral expectations are clearly cited, ensuring that there's access to instructional tasks, that there is engagement. The next section talks about high quality text. There are some example instructional practices. As I revisited this yesterday and last night and this morning, it really tied into a lot of what we heard yesterday with making content accessible. So this is just a tool also that helps our teachers visit and understand, am I making attempts to have this with my instruction? And the folks that have been accustomed to working with this here since it was brought out, are our core instruction teachers. And so some of them may already know what this tool is. If you've had your ESL folks that are new and have not taken the literacy training, they may have seen this as well. High quality questions and tasks. That is the next tab. So there's a bullet here that talks about providing questions that are considerate of a student's English proficiency level, as well as including the push to the next level. You see the Tennessee ELD standards linked in that section. There is a section on student ownership. And I believe that is the end of it. So those are just two resources that I wanted to share with you all. Just if you haven't had the opportunity to visit those are available for support. As we move forward with COPs and those practices that we will have available at the State Department, we will refer to those documents as folks engage with us, not as a model of saying that this is what has to be implemented in your district, but just as a support tool if teachers need resources to ensure that this is happening in the classroom. So I know that I've gone over some time. I do want to allow time for questions. This slide here talks about helpful resources. The new rule, actually I don't have, yes it is. It's linked in the first bullet. The individual learning plan instructional decision-making guide that some of y'all got to see when we were traveling for unique learning needs training is also linked there. This is where you will see the model that Hannah talked about, requesting an alternate service model. The information is in the individual learning plan guide, if that is something that you need. The manual is still linked here. Dana, do you want to talk a little bit about the manual?
As I mentioned yesterday, that's the old manual. The new one is in communications right now. We hope to have that out soon. We kind of held off. We had made a lot of changes to it to update it, and then we were waiting for this final update to rule to be published so that we could include those updates. So it's in communications. You will definitely hear from me when it's available. But right now, that's the old one.
And at the same time, there is an EL guidebook. And so our unique learning needs group also has contributed to that. And so that is in the process of being formatted. It's still not in communications yet, but it needs a little bit of formatting, and then it just needs some clean through of some sections, a lot of good information, especially with considering building cultural awareness if that is needed for a specific group of students that you might have in your school or whatever that might look like. So that manual is being fleshed out a little bit, cleaned up, and then it will go to communications and hopefully will be able to be released as soon as possible. Another resource that we will work with will be supporting long-term English learners. We've had a manual in the past, but it needs a little facelift. Yes. It needs a lot of up-to-date work. So we'll be working on that. So those are resources.
I wanted to say that EL guidebook is replacing that old EL framework, essentially.
So you might see the same picture, but it'll just be titled something else, and it'll say like 2023. And I think that brings us to the end. So we do have questions, and I'm going to, well, you all know our contact information, but go ahead. Let's go ahead and kick off some questions. We have mics coming through. Go for it, Joseph.
Could you go back to the slide where there's the circle? It's about TISA funding, so the big circle one, please. It's about halfway back.
And as she's getting to that, I will remind you the state level funding, not your federal Title III funding.
Okay. So I think visually, I figured it out here. It's actually not progressive the way those arrows are going around there. In fact, most students start off with Tier 3 funding and reduce to Tier 2 and to Tier 1, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not really showing like the progression. You're correct. You're correct. If we really looked at the progression, it would be more than likely that when we start yes, it would be thank you, Joseph, for pointing that out. You are correct.
All right. Then I have, sorry, another one. Can you go to the next slide then too?
Go to the next slide.
I promise, I'll keep it quick. right.
Kind of like your tier 3 interventions are
Yeah.
the most
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
intervention in the tier 3 funding, the
Got it.
TISA tier 3.
All right. So real quick, I don't see how students who are on alternate access fit into these formulas because this is all based on the proficiency level.
That is correct. So right now, Joseph, because there are going to be changes to the WIDA alternate, they're going to be on the same scale as 1 to 6. We are looking at the years of service for students when we look at the alternate. Yes.
And sorry, really nitpicky. I don't understand what happens with students who are at level 3. So if you look at your second to last row there, students above 3 overall,
Yes.
students below 3 overall, students at 3.
3.
We have a bunch of students that are at 3. So
Those would be your tier 3, Joseph. So as soon as they go above the 3,
so it's at or below?
yes, it's at or below. So yes,
At or below. Okay.
yes. So that
right.
little section is a little
Got it.
confusing. I do need to make a change, but then I'd have to send it through comms.
All right.
So for the purpose of
And-
today, we'll have it in discussion, but it will be changed.
All right, last question. Promise. What about students who are moving from non-WIDA states like Texas, California, ELPA 21? How do they fit into this? Because we don't screen, well, I don't know. Do we screen
We
them?
do. We do.
We do.
We do
Okay.
screen them.
We screen them. So they
Yes.
start off as year 1 again as an EL with us based on the screener. They're starting over. The clock starts again for them.
So
That's a good question.
So when they come to you and you screen with WIDA, when we work with Tennessee Pulse, there will be a field that captures the years that they've been in ESL and then the years that they've been in Tennessee for ESL.
So the years as ELs in another state
Yes.
count, but their scoring from another state
Is
has
for,
to be
for
WIDA.
Tennessee. And that was one of the things our commissioner wanted to have is the years that they've been with us and the years that they received elsewhere. So let's talk about the plan and how funding works for them. As soon as a student has a plan, that is what's going to support your funding. So you heard me say earlier that it's very important that we have data verification because that's what's going to push us to screening, right? To see if a student is eligible. And then if they're eligible, they need to have a plan. For this year, we're on lag data because it's our first year. But as we work through this year and we get a better progression and movement, as we move forward, these plans are what are going to support our funding for students. Yep.
And state rule still says that exiting in another state is valid in Tennessee. So they would still, if they exited and they would technically be a T1, they'll still enter here as counted as a T1, regardless of where they came from with their, okay. All right, done. Thanks.
Oh, you're fine, Joseph. If you have more, you let us know.
If they've been screened in a non-WIDA state and have not exited in that state, then you will need to rescreen them. But if they've exited in a non-WIDA state, they're still exited.
Thank you so much. First of all, this has been really helpful, and I've been taking notes so fast that my knuckles are burning. I do have a question about co-teaching, and it's more on behalf of a lot of teachers that have asked me, how is this going to impact some practices that we have? So my first question is, since co-teaching is backed up by evidence and research and recommended in the WIDA 2020 standards framework as options for meeting those standards, will co-teaching with the description of needing to include co-planning to count, do you think that would ever make it on the rule, or will it always be an additional step?
I think so. So I know we're being recorded, but Hannah and I do have had conversations with our Office of General Counsel to find a happy medium, I guess, a happy place where we're meeting the expectations and the compliance of the model. And so that's where we're headed. And so that's one of our next areas is to flesh out some context around what constitutes like evidence-based co-teaching, like what needs to be in place. So that is something that we've discussed.
Okay, thank
Yes.
you.
So you're welcome.
So for this year at least, if a school has all of the evidence to support co-teaching, the teachers have been trained, they would do the additional.
Yes,
Okay,
the request.
perfect,
Yes.
thank you.
And it's very helpful to include those details because you just don't want to send a request that says, you know, I want to do co-teaching at X, Y, Z. And Emily, you've submitted requests before, and you've shared with us like how thorough your descriptions have been. I don't know if you want to talk about and you don't have to talk specifically about what you've done, but like what you've shared to talk about like your data evidence and whatnot.
When I submitted mine, is this on? When I submitted mine, it was very detailed, and I tried to, include, kind of action steps that we were going to take, and then supporting data. I am also going to be writing a waiver for this, for co-teaching, because we are including co-planning in our instruction, and we are including structured small group time that will occur at the beginning of the literacy block in the classroom to front load and then move into whole group, with the ability of the ESL teacher to provide supports for all kids, but then also for those lower level kids, maybe in a both teach model, just depending on what that makeup looks like in the classroom. But also having the co-planning time in schedule, and, we have the follow-up with the building principals, and academic coaches to make sure that it's happening.
And as I said yesterday, we're not the ones to approve those, so I can't guarantee, but I feel like something like that, they're gonna go, oh, they have the justification.
Yeah, if they have a justification and they can, see that you're making attempts to put everything in place, then if there's like a specific question, they may reach out to maybe Debbie or someone on the team. But if you have questions around, what needs to be in there, we can share that information if you can't access it on the ILP guide, and any other questions you might have. Go ahead.
Lots of great resources and information today. Two quick questions. One, I realize that an ESL endorsed teacher must administer WIDA access. Must an ESL endorsed teacher be the one to administer the WIDA screener? Yes. The reason I ask that, and I'll just in full transparency, the reason I ask that is that, as many districts, we have lots of ELs transferring in, and so often our ESL teachers' planning time is consumed with having to administer those screeners, and this can really get cumbersome. So anyway, that's the reason. But so it does need to be an ESL endorsed teacher then to administer those screeners.
They have to have the training
And
as
they
well.
have to have that training.
Oh
So
yeah, I know
the
that. But
WIDA
I
screener
just-
for kindergarten training, or the WIDA screener training, whatever
Okay.
level they're doing.
All
And
right.
that's because we want them to have that background.
Yeah.
Whoever screens that child is making a decision at the moment that is going to impact that child's trajectory and their education. So you want somebody who understands those ESL nuances and things like that, screening that child or giving that assessment.
I
Because
understand.
we don't want to put somebody in ESL who doesn't need to be there, or not put somebody in ESL who does, just because the person doing it does not understand.
It was
Right.
not normed, or they haven't been formally normed
Yeah.
on what to look for. We get a lot of questions around accent, y'all. A lot of questions around accent and assessment. So, having someone that knows what those little nuances might be, what to look for, it really goes a long way when you're assessing students.
And one
Go
last
ahead, Stan.
question.
Go ahead, Stan.
I realize the T1, T2 monitoring will still take place, but just to clarify, that will take place through the ILPs and not a monitoring form.
No, it will not. And so it will be in Tennessee Pulse, Stan.
Okay,
So it
thank
will be
you.
part of Tennessee Pulse.
Go ahead.
Yeah, go for it.
Quick question about the new ESL rule. So something's a little unclear. It says ILP is needed within the 30 days, which makes sense. And then it's also ILP quarterly. So is this going to be ILPs at the end of the quarter? And so are we going to have an ILP within the 30 days of the first day of school and one at the end of the quarter for quarter one?
So when you go in and adjust, so when you adjust like goals, or if you adjust scaffolds, whatever that might be, that is done quarterly.
So essentially there's going to be 2 ILP dates in the first quarter, which one is going to be their initial
Their
to start
initial,
it.
and then when you
then
monitored.
monitoring.
Yes, and if you make changes, that ILP that you had for that first set of days will save as what they're calling an event, so like a file in your platform. And then when you make the changes, a new final ILP will be created with the updates, but you will still have the historical data of the one that you started with for that child.
Perfect. And then my second question is, since we are now, especially in the grades 4 through 12, including those grades, and hopefully I attended your training on June 23rd. Hopefully the SIS is going to be able to pull those into Tennessee Pulse.
Yes.
The fourth quarter date, is there any guidance with the state? Is it going to happen before the end of the school year, or are they going to want the grades in the ILP? So the teachers are going to have to do it like that first week after.
So that's a great question. So the quarterly dates are able for districts to be able to enter when that happens. And so that might be something for you to think about in your district, like how you want that to look, or if your leadership that's going to be working with you, if you're leading this, how you want this to look like. And so you'll be able to manipulate those fields for that last quarter monitoring. Yep. Yes. You have a question. Go ahead, Dr.
Quick
Go ahead.
question. The 30 days, is it calendar days or school days?
That is a great question. I can't remember.
I believe it's calendar days.
I can't remember what. Thank you for being here with me today.
She left me yesterday, but
she's here with me today. Yes, calendar days. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Emily, go ahead.
So I have a quick question, just kind of piggybacking on what Joseph was asking, in regards to students who are coming in from out of state. So let's say that we have a student coming to us from Texas. They were an EL in Texas and have been receiving services. We go and we screen them with the WIDA screener and we say, oh, you don't need our services anymore. Are those students what happens to their transition?
That is a great
And so that's the thing I'm really worried about, because this happens. We always have at least one every year. And what is your recommendation for providing that? Or
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way this happened, and I know we're being recorded, the way this happened is as you all engage with results-based monitoring, the same happens for the State Department. And so one of the areas that was an area of change, a correction needed, was around the screening processes. And so basically, this is why this is happening, because we might get a student from Texas, Ohio, New York, states that have their own assessment, that when they screen with us, they may not meet the criteria to be in service, so they're exited. For our purposes in our state, keeping in mind that that student, if they did meet that exit criteria and didn't receive continual ESL service, they would be T1 and T2 in our system. And so we would be able to still gauge their progress, even though they're not receiving that direct or indirect ESL service. In our system, we would still put them as T1, T2, and they would have that ILP. Because at that point, they're still exited, right, as T1, T2, but we're monitoring for 2 years to make sure that they're making that progress.
Are you asking about students who come and they've exited, or students who come and you're having to re-screen them?
right, so the students that we have to rescreen, we can't exit them on a rescreen.
Yeah.
So, how are we communicating that decision to exit with parents?
It's not an exit.
That's right.
It's they didn't qualify. They didn't qualify. There's nothing. I'm trying to be very careful with my wording here. There's nothing that says your ESL teacher cannot still check in on that child, or that those content teachers cannot provide the scaffolding that student needs. Just like our students who are not ESL but maybe come from a background where they don't have a lot of vocabulary in their world. Your content teachers still have to scaffold for them.
And we do give them, and we can give them the ILP for the T1.
Yes, I can see that. Let me take that back, Emily, because that is a good question. I'm over here thinking about exit, but the reality is these kids, if they screen, would be that they would not meet the services in our state. So really, when we have a student that doesn't meet services in our state, that's it. They're just gen ed, right? Like no ESL. Let me take that question back to the department, because that's a really good question. Question has not come up. We know that we rescreen if they come from a state that does not have a WIDA assessment. We honor exit if that's the case. But what happens if they exit with our tool and they were still receiving services, somewhere else? Yeah, that's correct. You're correct. Thank you for that.
This is a gray area, but yeah, if you got
video, I'm correcting that. That people that are watching, I have to take that one back.
Thank you all so much. Really.
Yeah, I'll take that back, Emily.
Oh, well, this is on the same topic. We had a couple students who screened in a non-WIDA state, did not qualify for EL in kindergarten, came to us in middle school, and there was a little question about whether we screen, you know, I mean, that was, to me, that's almost like an exit. Can we honor that as a non-service, or do we have to rescreen?
These kids came from a state that was not WIDA, but they exited.
No, they never tested in.
They never qualified.
They never qualified based on a non-WIDA test.
If they come in now, my understanding, if they come in now in 5th grade, whatever, and you rescreen them with WIDA, because that's what our state is using, if they qualify, then they're ESL.
So are we supposed to rescreen them even though they've not been in ESL?
That's a good understanding. Is it? Okay. That's a good question.
Because different states have different criteria, and this is what US Ed kindly said to us.
That's going to be a tough conversation with the parents.
Yes.
Well, I'm thinking, would that be like this day forward? Like you're not going back. Like, okay, like 2 years ago, that was the situation.
But now you're 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road. That's probably another one we need to revisit with legal. We'll take that one. We have a meeting coming up.
Like they would be grandfathered in or something.
Yeah. Yeah, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, I know, right?
A grandfather, yeah. Yeah, we can take that one back.
Talking about ILPs and T-Impulse, I was thinking about a due date for my teachers. They all need to be in by such and such. We start August 7th. So should I say all ILPs need to be in T-Impulse by September 7th, 30 days?
30 days. But Ms. Megan, you know that you're going to have kids that already have an ILP, right? They're not brand new. There will be a bypass feature to upload that ILP that student currently has. And I believe there's going to be a 90-day window to give your teachers time to get everything into the system. So if I'm your teacher and I have an ILP, whether it be Google, a previous platform for Ms. Hannah, I would make sure Ms. Hannah is in the system, first of all, upload her ILP, and then I have 90 days to get everything worked out in the system. But for the time being, that ILP that's already in place for that child can be uploaded into the system. So for this initial, you heard Hannah say there is a lot of grace as we kick off this year. There will be bypass features this year that will be available for certain components to get us going. As we get momentum and we start working more with data and our teachers get more training and they have the opportunity to get in there and start, crunching fields, seeing, what's transferred over, what do I have to put in? Then we'll go from there. And it might be that we may need to extend that 90-day window. Just depends on sizes of districts, that sort of thing. So we are considering that. Yeah.
Talking about co-teaching.
Yes.
Would that fall under the content-based instruction model, or does it need to have an alternate model filled out?
And I believe that's what Mr. Stan is doing. He's doing it within the content-based instruction model. I believe there's another district that told us they're using that model as well. I want to say it's Hamblin County. I don't know if they're with us here today, but.
Just wanted to clarify,
Yeah.
because, the alternate model is a long process to fill out, and I will do it because we do have some schools that are doing co-teaching correctly.
Yeah.
But if it falls under the content-based instruction model, then I'm going to leave it there.
Okay.
Okay.
How you're doing that
Yeah.
as to what model it could fall
And then
under.
my last one, is there a state guidance document that helps us determine ELs that would be sped? Is there
So
something
we
out there
have-
already?
We have component 2.4 in the special education framework. And I believe it's titled Cultural Considerations for English Learners. I used to know the page, Megan, by heart. I knew it. That's terrible. But it's component 2.4 of the special education framework. There will be a short reference in the EL guidebook, but the more detailed information will be in the special ed framework. Also, our director of school psychologist, Dr. April Ebinger, has a video, a COP or a PLC that she did with some districts. And I will ask where that is linked to share that, because I believe like the last 35, 40 minutes of that COP really talks about the EL considerations. Yeah. Have you watched it, Alice?
So It was very helpful. It would be great to have that accessible where we can find it.
Perfect. Okay, so I will look for that. Ms. Megan, will you email me, just say, will you just remember to tell us where the COP video, or you, Alice, if one of you will, so that I don't forget to make sure I know where that's at.
Also going to plug at that Title III Day at our Federal Programs Institute, Susan, and I never pronounce her name correctly, Ussery, is going to do a session on difference or disability.
Yeah, so she'll be doing that. Yes, go ahead.
I just want to clarify what you said before that question. So if a student comes from out of state and their home language survey indicates that they, on one of those, indicates a language other than English, even if they exited from that previous state, they still need to be screened? Is that what I...
No, if they exit it, you honor the exit.
Okay.
You honor it, yes.
Okay.
You exit, yeah. Exit,
Okay,
we
but
always honor.
if that home language survey says something other than English and they come in as an active ESL student, we have to screen that student.
If they're from a non-WIDA state.
Correct. Okay, perfect.
But we are going to go back and ask again about the kiddo that screened, for example, with an Ohio tool or a New York tool or whatnot and didn't qualify, but now they're with us. Like, what do we do in that sense? Because they didn't meet the qualifications there. Are we to rescreen, you know, and that sort of thing? We'll get more clarification on that. There was a question here? Yes. Okay. So we'll get more information on that. So I got to take 2 questions back. That one and Emily's about the kid that screens and doesn't qualify for services here. What do we do? Like, what happens next? So I'll take those 2 questions back. Anyone else?
So this is my question. So as we're getting more teachers, general ed teachers becoming ESL certified, right? How can we use them in the classroom to help with providing services
That is a great,
without
yeah.
it being the content teachers doing the same thing for everybody? How does that look different than receiving that hour of services?
Okay. So that's something also that we need to get guidance on, because we are getting that more across the board. Do we have anyone in the room?
Well, I just know from Jan Lanier when I had asked about that, because I know like in certain districts when, you know, they have a lot of their teachers, or almost all of them are duly certified. How does that look without coming out of compliance?
Yes.
So it's tricky. But she said you couldn't double dip.
Yes.
And so what does that look like if we start to get more teachers endorsed?
That are certified. I'd share a model that I just heard of yesterday, but I don't know. Let me get more guidance on that to support that, just because I want to make sure that what was shared with me yesterday is going to work like for us. So, yeah, because I do see that happening. For example, in the district that I mentioned earlier, this district is working on getting pretty much 2 of their schools school-wide duly certified, so content and ESL. And so really looking at how do we have still that specialized time to meet those specific needs of kids.
Right.
And who knows, it might be like a walk-to-learn model that's very similar to...
I'm thinking of like newcomers and those students, and then you've got some that, you know, they just need that separate push to get them to exit, you know, and it's just very tricky.
It is. You're correct.
I think Joanne hit the nail on the head. It's that separate time there is key.
A focus time, yeah.
Okay.
So 3 questions to take back. 3. I just have to keep telling myself that so I remember. Taking 3.
And tomorrow she'll say, what was that second
Yeah,
question?
so now I'll ask Hannah later on. Hannah, do you remember the 3 questions? No, I'm taking 3. Yes.
Great questions, and I hope you had a chance to ask whatever you wanted to.